Hi, I'm Susan Rutledge, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make two seamless pattern brushes in Adobe Illustrator. We're going to be making the round ball pattern brush and the double stroke pattern brush. In my last video I showed how to make the red and green interlocking seamless pattern brush, and I also explained in detail how pattern brushes work. I encourage you, if you haven't seen that video, to go back and check that one next. I'm going to move over now to a blank document, and we're going to start on the red and green ball pattern brush. Now this circle pattern brush is made from a pretty small design. I'm going to make the design larger just so that you can see what I'm doing, and then we'll scale it down before we turn it into a pattern brush. I'll get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and click on the artboard to open the ellipse dialog box. I'll type in 1.5 inches for the width, tab down and type in 1.5 inches for the height, and then I'll say OK. Now I'll click on the artboard again to open up the dialog box again. This time I'll type in 0.75 for the width, tab down and type in 0.75 for the height, and press OK again. Now I'm going to come over to the Properties panel, click on the Color Fill icon, and for the small circle, I'll apply this green CMYK color 85, 10, 100, 10. I've got to click on the artboard to close out the swatches panel and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, to select our bigger circle, and I'll come back over and click on the color fill icon again, and this time I'll apply this CMYK red color 15, 100, 90, 10. Now grab the green circle and drag it next to the red circle, and I could create the pattern brush right here with this design. However, if I want to apply the pattern brush to any kind of an object that has a corner, I'll run into a problem because this design is not evenly balanced. To fix that problem so that I can use the pattern brush on any object, I'm going to add another green circle to the other side of the big red circle. So I'll hold down the Option key, and I'm just going to drag a copy over to the other side. Then I'll select all three of the circles and move over to the Properties panel. In the Align area, I'm going to click on Vertical Align Center. Now the reason that I want these aligned perfectly is because precision is very important if we want our pattern brushes to be seamless. So the next step is to select all three of these circles, and I'll come up to Object and I'll click on Expand. I'm going to leave Fill and Stroke selected, and I'll say OK. Next, I've got to create a bounding box to give Illustrator the boundaries of the design. To do that, I'm going to add some guides to my artboard to help me be very precise. So first, I'll turn my rulers on, keyboard shortcut Command R. Then I'm going to come over to the left toolbar, click down on the ruler and drag with my mouse, and I'm going to place the first guide on top of the center anchors of my right circle and release my mouse. Now I'll select this left circle, and I'm going to grab another guide and place it right here on top of these anchors. Now I have the left and right boundaries for my design, which is going to make creating the bounding box so much easier. I'm going to get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M. I'll make sure I don't have a fill color or a stroke color, and then I'm going to drag a rectangle out. I'll start along the left guide, and I'm going to drag across the design, and I'll come to the right guide, and when I intersect, I'll release my mouse. Now, in addition to being invisible, the rectangle also has got to be behind the design, so I'll move it there using the keyboard shortcut Shift Command left bracket. Now I can get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select both of the guides and delete them. Well, I have my design created now. We need to scale it down, so I'll come up to Object, Transform, and Scale, and I am going to scale it to 20%, and I'll say OK. Next, we need to open the Brushes panel. I'll come up to Window and choose Brushes. I could also open it up with the keyboard shortcut F5. Now I'm going to grab hold of the Brushes tab and dock it with the other tabs on the right side of my artboard. And then I'll come down to the bottom of the Brushes panel and click on the New Brush icon, and this is going to open up the New Brush dialog box. I'll click on Pattern Brush and say OK, and I'll type in red and green circles. And I'm going to leave the scale set to fixed. I'll leave the spacing alone. And next we have some bins that give us the different parts of our pattern brush. The second bin is where the design goes that repeats along all the straight lines. This is called the side tile. Now, Illustrator also has suggested an outer corner tile for us. This piece is going to go on any outside corners. I can twirl down here and see that I have 4 choices that I can pick from. I can choose the auto centered, and if I do, you'll see what that's going to look like. I can click on auto between, and Illustrator makes those changes. I actually like the auto sliced, and so I'm going to choose that, and then come over to the inner corner tile bin, and I'll twirl this down here, and I'll choose auto sliced for that as well, so the outer and the inner corners match. I won't change any of the other settings, and I'll say OK, and then I'm going to move our design up out of the way and get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and drag out a rectangle on the artboard, and then I'm going to select our red and green circles pattern brush, and we end up with a really nice result. The corners look great, and there's not any little spaces in between the repeats, and that's because I was very careful when I created my bounding box. I'll select the rectangle and delete it. Now let's work on the double stroke pattern brush. I'll get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and click on the artboard to open the rectangle dialog box, and I'm going to type in 2 inches for the width, tab down and type in 0.2 inches for the height, and say OK. I'll move over to the Properties panel, and I'm going to change the stroke color to black and the fill color to this CMYK green 8510 110. And then I'll click on the artboard to close the swatches panel. Now I'm going to make a copy of this rectangle, and I want to place it exactly 0.05 inches below the first one. The easiest way to do that is to come up to Object, choose Transform, and then Move. Now for these measurements, I don't want a horizontal move, so I'm going to leave 0 here. But for the vertical move, I have to take the height of my rectangle, which is 0.2 inches, and I have to add in the space I want in between the 2 rectangles, which is 0.05. So I'm going to type in 0.25 for the vertical, then be sure and press copy. Now I'm going to change the color of this second rectangle to this CMYK red color, 15 100 90 10, and then I'll click on the artboard to close the swatches panel. Now, creating the bounding box for this design is simple because both of the sides already match up. I just need to make a few changes so that I don't have lines on the sides in between each of the repeats. Well, the first thing I'll do is get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select both of the rectangles, come up to Object, choose Expand. I'll leave Fill and Stroke checked and say OK. Now I'm going to click on the artboard to deselect my rectangles and then get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and I've got to remove the fill color for my bounding box. There's not a stroke color. I'll start just slightly above the green rectangle and drag down and make sure that I get just a little bit underneath the red rectangle, and I'll release my mouse. Then I have to move the bounding box behind the design, and to do that, I'll use the keyboard shortcut Shift Command left bracket. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll select both the design and the bounding box, and I'm going to use the shape builder tool to get rid of the parts of the design that I don't need that are outside of the bounding box. The shape builder tool is keyboard shortcut Shift M, and I'll hold down the Option key and drag over the parts on the outside of the right side of the bounding box, and then drag over the parts on the left side of the bounding box. In some instances, I would use the Pathfinder Divide tool and pull the parts off that way, but for some reason the Pathfinder Divide tool does not work here, and I end up with lines in my corners. So I'm using the Shape Builder tool, and it's working great. Now I'm going to group the design and the bounding box together. I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command G and then open up the brushes panel, come down and click on the new brush icon, and I'll choose pattern brush and say OK. For this brush, we're going to call it red green strokes brush. I'll leave the scale set to fixed, the spacing at 0%. Illustrator's already applied an outer corner tile. Let's see what our choices are here. I can do auto centered, auto between. Those both look similar. In fact, auto sliced looks pretty much the same. Auto overlap is a little different. I'm going to go with the auto centered and then move over to the bin for the inner corner tiles, and we'll choose auto centered here as well. I'll leave the rest of the settings alone and say OK, and then I'll move our design up out of the way and get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M. I'll drag a rectangle out on the board and I'll click on the pattern brush and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we have another very sharp looking seamless pattern brush. The corners look great. There aren't any lines in between the repeats, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to see where one part of the design begins and another part ends, and that's why it's so important to make sure everything lines up when you make your design. I do hope that you've enjoyed learning how to make these pattern brushes, and I want to remind you to go back and check out the video and learn how to make this interlocking seamless pattern brush if you haven't seen that one yet. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my future tutorials, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye now.